We're going to be walking through exercise 30-8 from the textbook, which is a basic solver example. What we have in the textbook is 3 different shoe types, along with their unit profitability, the amount of labor to make each shoe, and the machine time in order to manufacture each shoe. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to copy the table from the textbook from the example 30-8 into your Excel sheet, just like I've done here. So we have our shoe name, shoe 1, shoe 2, shoe 3, and then the amount of profitability per unit, the labor per unit, the machine time per unit. And the number of units that we're going to produce, we haven't populated that number because what we're going to do is we're going to use Solver in order to determine what the right number of units is in order to maximize our profitability. So one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to look at adding some formulas in here to calculate our profitability. So I'm going to add that down at the bottom here, and I'm going to call that total profit. And how that is going to be calculated is by multiplying the number of units made by the profitability per product. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name some of my groups of cells. So just for the use of my model. So I'm going to call this unit profit. Labor time, machine time, and my units. Oh, let's fix that. Call that units instead of unit. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to name my total profit, and that's going to refer to this cell right here. And you could do this by saying this multiplied by this plus this multiplied by this. But one of the formula that we're learning this week is called sum product. And that makes this equation a lot easier to execute on. So by typing in sum product, we can easily refer to 2 strings of cell references that we want to multiply against each other. So in this case, it's going to be our units, comma, right? Note the syntax is a comma in between the 2 groups of cell references, and then unit profit. And right now that's going to be 0 because my number of units is 0. If I add that to be 1 unit of each, you'll see that the total profit is, of course, $95. So profit is our goal. The next thing we need to look at is what are our constraints. So one of the constraints usually is going to be time. So in this case, I know that each unit of shoe 1 is going to take 40 minutes, shoe 2, 20 minutes, shoe 3, 30 minutes. which means that everybody has a limited amount of time. I'm going to need to add a constraint for how much time I have. In this case, we're working with a 40-hour work week, which means that our time available, I'm going to call that my availability, is simply going to be 60 minutes. Remember, these are all in minutes, multiplied by 40 hours. And then my we won't call that utilization because we're going to use that shortly. Let's call this time used or time worked. And that, again, I'm going to use my sum product. And that's going to be based on my units. For this one, multiplied by my labor time. And then my machine time, it's going to be my sum product of my units multiplied by my machine time. So I know that I have 40 hours of work in a week, and that's one of my constraints. Sometimes I have demand that I need to consider. In this first example, we don't have a specified demand, but we're going to put that in here because we're going to use that in a next step. And then another item that we want to be aware of is utilization. And what that's going to look at is how much I'm actually using of a constrained resource. So in this, call that time worked, call that my availability, and my utilization is simply going to be a calculation of my time worked divided by my availability. And that will be a percentage. Now it's time to use my solver. So if you haven't already done so, you might need to install solver in your Excel version. So if you haven't already done so, there is a video that's available on how to do this within week 11. So please make sure that you do this. And then once you've installed solver, you'll be able to go to data in your toolbar and go find solver under the analyzed section. And this is where we're going to populate our constraints as well as our objective. So our objective in this case is going to be to maximize total profit. So if this, for example, were total cost, we would likely want to minimize it. But in this case, profit, you want to maximize it. And we're going to do that by changing the number of units, these three here. So the number of units of shoe 1, shoe 2, and shoe 3 that we're going to produce. And then everything is has to operate within certain constraints, so we're going to add those constraints. So for our first example, our constraints are going to be based on our time worked. So I want to make sure that my time worked is less than or equal to my availability. which is the 2,400 minutes in a week. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that my units, which again is these 3 cells up here that I'm going to change, I want to ensure that those are integers. So if you look in the drop down here, there's a less than, equal to, greater than, equal to. We're looking for the int. And then I'm going to press OK. And this is a linear solver model. So I'm going to select the Simplex LP. And now all I need to do is press solve. So you'll see here that the solver has populated. And I want to populate my answer report. So I'm going to highlight that and press OK. So you can see in this case that in order to maximize my profit while also staying within my constraints, I end up making no product or shoe 1. I make 41 of shoe 2 and 52 of shoe 3, and that results in a total profit of $2,585. And then this is my answer report for my first solver. And that'll show you, what the constraints were, the variable cells, what their original value was, what the final value was, and of course, what our original value on our profit was, as well as the final value on that. So now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to copy this sheet. And I'm going to complete a second version of this problem, which you'll see referenced in the slides for this week. So you want to see there's 2 additional constraints. One is the additional constraint related to the minimum number of units. So the minimum number of units just means that's our demand. And then there's a second one for machine utilization of 95% is our maximum. So first we're going to tackle this demand piece. So in order to do this, I am going to, first of all, add in my demand, which is going to be 15 units each. And now I'm going to define these cells as demand by naming them. And then I'm going to go into my solver and I'm going to add one more constraint. Constraint being that my demand is going to be greater than or equal to, you want to make sure that you're satisfying your demand. Sorry, cancel that. You want to make sure that your units are greater than or equal to your demand. And press OK. And then again, everything else remains the same. So my my availability is still limited to 2,400 units. I still want to maximize my profit, so I don't want to change anything else. I'm just going to press solve. And then once again, I want to generate my answer report. So I'm going to highlight the answer report, press OK. And now you can see that my profit is $2,500. And I'm now producing a minimum of 15 units for each model or each shoe. And if I compare that, so you see my My total profit's a little bit lower, which makes sense because previously we were only focusing on maximizing profit. Now we're focused on maximizing profit, but also meeting demand, which means we need to make some of these shoe one, which takes a lot more labor and machine time versus their unit profit. So that's the second part. And again, you've got your answer report that goes through and has that information on it of what the original was, each of your constraints, if they're binding, non-binding, and how your profit has changed. And then I'm going to copy this one more time. Move it to the end. I'm now going to call this solver 3. And my last constraint is going to be related to utilization. So if you look at current utilization, it's 100%. In the first model, it was 99%. And in the last model, it was 100%. That puts a big constraint on labor, right? People, as well as the machine time. So let's say we wanted to limit that to 95%. Now I already have my time worked and availability named, but I don't have my utilization named. And I'm going to name my target utilization. And then I'm going to update my constraints. So I'm going to take out the demand because I'm going to assume that demand is irrelevant in this example. Go back to my solver under data, solver. I'm going to delete my constraint related to demand. And then I'm going to add a constraint related to utilization. So in this case, I want to make sure that the cell references are going to be my utilization. Is less than or equal to my target utilization. And I press OK. And then I'm going to solve this one. Once again, I want to keep my answer report. So now in this example, because I'm limiting the amount of labor and machine time by 5%, reducing it to 95% from 100, my total amount of profit is now a little bit less. It's $2,475 compared to $2,500 when I'm just focused on meeting demand, and then $2,585 where I'm really only trying to stay within my available time and available labor. And that is all for that one.